episode of CEO Conversations. My name is Shelly Weir. I am the president and CEO of the Florida Institute of CPAs. And thank you so much for joining us today. We have a really important and time-sensitive update for you relative to the beneficial ownership reporting requirement that is upon us on January 1st of 2024. I am thrilled to be joined today with our dear friends from Aon. Nicole Graham specifically is a risk consultant at Aon, the national administrator of the AICPA member insurance program. She provides guidance and risk advice to regional and national CPA firms regarding professional liability, cybersecurity, employment practices, management liability, and other related exposures. Prior to joining Aon, Nicole was a partner at a national law firm and defended CPAs and other professionals in professional liability lawsuits. Nicole, I can't thank you enough for being here today, talking through what we know is a bit of a complex issue facing the profession, but really more of businesses nationwide. So your background is so perfect to be able to guide us a bit as best we can as we sit here today, as you'll hear us say a lot throughout today's conversation. But just as a quick table setter, and again, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, our pleasure. Thanks again for the partnership. And we're just so thrilled to have our partnership with Aon and to be able to turn to you guys when we are in need, such as today, for this type of helpful information. So just a quick table setter. Hopefully by now, most of our members know what we're talking about when we talk about BOI reporting. But for those that may go, Shelly, what the heck are you talking about today? Can you give us just a general overview of what the BOI reporting is, what's coming in 2024 with this new requirement?
Sure. So in 2021, Congress enacted the Corporate Transparency Act, which is an anti-money laundering initiative. So under the Corporate Transparency Act, or CTA, as I like to abbreviate it, entities must file a report that identifies their beneficial owners. And it's basically a way for the government to see through companies and shell companies to see where the money goes, who gets the money. And most businesses are going to have to file these reports. There are, the reporting entities are basically any entities that have to file something with the Secretary of State or similar type of, entity within the state governments. And there are 23 exemptions, but a lot of them are for different companies that already have to report this information under other statutes. One of the, I think, exemptions that is important to note for CPAs is the large operating company exemption, because that one, may impact some of their clients. So the exemption is for entities that are have a physical presence in the U.S., have 20 or more employees in the U.S., and they had gross revenue of $5 million or more on their previous tax return. So that's sort of a threshold that you should really keep in mind when evaluating your clients and who may need to report. The beneficial owner is basically anyone who has a 25% or more ownership interest in the company, or anyone who directly or indirectly exercises substantial control over the company. So you're thinking like company officers, people who are, running the companies day to day. So that is in a nutshell what it is. And as of right this minute, existing entities, so any entity that exists today or is formed prior to January 1st of 2024, has a full year to file their report. So that your reports are due sort of before January 1st of 2025. Entities that are formed starting January 1st, 2024 through December 31st, 2024 have a 90-day reporting window, which was recently increased. It had been 30 and it was just increased to 90, which is so great because it takes a little bit of pressure off the start of the year. So now the first possible reports won't be due at the end of January, beginning of February. They'll be end of March, beginning of April. which is a slightly busy time of year for CPAs, but we'll take what we can get at this point. And then any entity formed after December 31st of 2024, that goes back to the 30-day window.
Yeah.
So that is right now.
So there's a couple of things that you said there that I want to really hit home for our members. In many conversations that I've had with our members across the state, first and foremost, to your point, the Corporate Transparency Act was passed back in 2021. So this is not a new issue. It's just that now the reporting period is upon us. So I have had some members say, can we not fix this legislatively? And so the answer right now is the best that we can do is to get a delayed implementation date. This legislation was already passed and it's already in law and has been for a couple of years now. And it is a federal issue. This is not a state legislative issue. So that's the first important point I want to make. The second point that I want to hit home that you just shared is it's any corporate entity. So LLC, partnership, et cetera. There are these exceptions that you can look up on the FinCEN website. But the other point that I think is important is you could have one entity that has more than one report, right, Nicole? You could have an ownership report, and then you could have, well, gosh, the CEO has a significant oversight. And so you've got to really be mindful of that as well. And then lastly, I have had a couple of members get a little bit confused that they think that this is an IRS issue, and it is not an IRS issue. This is specifically a Treasury issue with FinCEN. So just be mindful of those three things. One thing that we did not touch on yet that I think would be good just from a context perspective, Nicole, is the penalty. If someone does not file this report and they are caught by the Treasury to be in or out of compliance, if you will, tell our members a little bit about these, quite frankly, very scary penalties that will await the company.
Yes. So there is risk for non-compliance, and it is a pretty significant risk. So there are civil and criminal penalties, $500 a day, up to $10,000, and up to 2 years in prison for willful violation. And, you know, that is a significant penalty, and you don't want to get caught in something like that.
Definitely not. The prison in and of itself, to me, is that we have to pay attention to this and make sure that we are, making decisions in the appropriate fashion, which leads me to the profession as a whole. This really isn't a CPA professional issue specifically, though it's bleeding over a bit into our area because we already file reports with FinCEN on behalf of our clients. In many cases, we certainly file reports to the IRS, which is why several firms, and I would venture a guess many firms, have sort of been thinking of this through their tax vertical, if you will. But it really is a business issue and not a CPA specific issue. All that to say, FinCEN estimates, I believe it's 32 million businesses will need to comply with this act starting in 2024. So let's talk about the impacts to CPAs specifically. From my vantage point, and tell me if you agree, the decision that CPAs have to make right now is whether or not they want to provide this service on behalf of their clients. And by doing that, they are assessing the risk, which is why having you here is so important today. Do you agree with that sentiment? And can you maybe explain a little bit about how this is impacting CPAs and why they're having to measure this risk?
So I totally agree with you. And I will also want to say that CPAs are probably in best position to help clients in this regard. A lot of these companies that are going to have to report don't know what FinCEN is. They're like, Financial Crime Enforcement Network. What are you talking about? Why do they need my information? So, and they don't have corporate counsel or legal counsel that they regularly, speak with, but they do have their CPA, and, CPAs are intimately involved in their clients' businesses. They're, as advisory practices are growing, they're becoming more and more familiar with, how their clients operate their businesses. So your CPA is going to be your natural person to turn to if you're a small business owner. And that's why I think it's very important right now that not only do CPAs have to decide whether they want to do the service, I think first and foremost, they should raise awareness to their clients. You want to make sure that their clients are aware that the statute exists, that they may have a reporting obligation. The AICPA has a very nice client-facing form. They have a whole beneficial ownership resource center, and they have a client-facing form that you can use on cpai.com. There is the risk alert on this issue, which is, I will tell you, it is very long, but it gets into the nitty-gritty. It tells you everything you need to know in a way that is easy to understand. You could also pull language from it if you wanted to use it to inform your clients. In the risk alert, there's also language for your engagement letter that you can plug into for every service line saying, hey, this exists. Look at, fincen.gov/BOI, sending them to some resources that they can see what it is. And then after you tell them about it, then you're going to have to say whether or not you're going to assist. And there are a lot of things that you need to think about when you're trying to determine if you're going to provide services related to CTA compliance. And one of the big ones is around whether or not providing such services to clients would be the unauthorized practice of law. There's a debate that tax professionals providing business advice under a money and finance statute could be considered the unauthorized practice of law, or UPL as we like to call it, just adding to the acronyms we have here. But I will say that no state has come forward and issued any guidance. So no state has come forward and said, yes, this is the unauthorized practice of law. However, they also haven't said it isn't. I think they're taking a wait and see approach, especially because each state bar decides this. So it's a state by state consideration. It's not federal. Each state bar decides what is the unauthorized practice of law, and they are lawyers. So they are going to want facts and circumstances and apply it to their law. They don't want to give you a hypothetical and answer. So it's very lawyerly of them, but not helpful to us right now. So if you are going to choose to provide these services to your clients, just know that you are operating in a gray area when it comes to the unauthorized practice of law. And that is important because in some states, the unauthorized practice of law is a criminal misdemeanor, and in others, it's just a civil violation. So that's something that you should look into, when making your determination.
And I'm glad that you brought up UPL because, as you just stated, as we sit today, no state has issued an official declaration as to whether or not completing these reports on behalf of your clients would be considered the unlicensed practice of law, and that includes us here in Florida. Members, as I have shared with you in recent communication, we have been in direct contact with the chair of the UPL division of the Florida Bar. This is on their radar screen. However, he has advised us that it will be likely up to a year, if not longer, before they will issue an official position on this issue. So it goes in line with exactly what Nicole just said, which I know is incredibly frustrating for you as members, because you would like a black or white answer so that you can appropriately assess your risk as part of this service to your clients. Unfortunately, we are not going to get clarity. All I can do for you at this time is continue to press, find out more from the Florida Bar as they're making their determination, and certainly keep you apprised if we do have any states that do issue a declaration either way in the weeks and months ahead, so that you are aware of what's happening around the country. I want to go back to your point, Nicole, a moment ago around mitigating risk. Obviously, you are in the business of risk mitigation with what you do at Aon. What type of advice could you help to provide our members right now in terms of what they could be doing to mitigate their risk, how is Aon looking at this from a carrier perspective, and just any helpful hints that you can provide. Again, recognizing fully there's a lot of gray area with this issue, which we know is frustrating.
Yes, I feel like this is the only thing I talk about anymore. And I've been talking to a lot of firms, and I'm constantly saying, look, I don't have real answers for you, but here's the best we can do. And that's what we have. So one of the biggest risks is failure to advise. You know, your client saying, you didn't tell me that I had to file this report. Now I have, I'm, 9 months late at $500 a day. This is a problem. So that is why we strongly advise you to either in your engagement letters or in a separate like alert or newsletter to clients, advise them that this obligation is out there, and to make them aware that they need to look into this, and then advise whether or not you're going to provide the services. Obviously, there's a risk of providing the service, like getting the report wrong, but even to a lesser extent, just answering questions sort of off the cuff, like a client, you're talking to a client about something and they're like, oh, wait, let me ask you. And they ask you a question because they're trying to figure out their BOI report. In those situations, you want to give like a high level response of a general nature, really not to get too much into the nitty gritty, and then follow it up in writing. So you're not sort of giving this off the cuff advice. If you are going to provide the services, then we have a whole bunch of other stuff to talk about.
Yeah. So let's go back to, you've not decided yet if you're going to provide or not provide. I love the advice that you just gave, Nicole, because again, in the absence of clarity around the UPL issue, the second thing I think hopefully is obvious, but we clearly recommend that you touch base with your malpractice insurance carrier, find out if they are going to cover you with this particular service offering or not, because again, that's another piece of information that you'll want to have in the process. But I love what you said, Nicole, that the biggest risk here is a failure to actually inform your clients of this requirement. So if you do nothing else, make sure that you are advising them that this is something that they do have to comply with, either in the engagement letter, a news alert, etc. I also really like what you just said around if you get asked in a conversation, because that's probably one of the most common questions that I've been getting, especially from our smaller firms that just have such beautiful client relationships and want to be there for every single thing that their clients need, which of course our larger firms do as well, but it's especially prevalent with our smaller and local firms. And what I keep hearing from them is, well, what do I do if a client brings this up to me on the phone when we're talking about something else? Do I bill them for that time? Do I not bill them for that time? What do I do? So it sounds like your recommendation is to really, give them some high level direction and follow up with what you talked about in writing to protect your risk to the firm, which I think is great advice. Okay, so let's go over to, I've decided to do this work for my clients. Any high level pieces of advice that you can give to our members that are going to dive into this side of the aisle?
Sure. So if you are going to provide services, you have to think about what you are going to do, what you are providing. Are you just simply going to offer the preparation of an initial report and then say, because this isn't an annual report. That's another thing that I think people don't understand. This is not an annual report. This is something that you file an initial report, and you really only need to ever file again if there was an error in the initial report that was discovered and you need to correct it, which there's again a 30-day window to do so, or if there's an update of information, a change in the beneficial ownership information. So, and again, when there is a change, there is still a very, very tiny 30-day window, which is not a lot of time. So you have to figure out, am I just going to offer the report and make the client come back to me when they have a change, or are you going to monitor the situation for the client? And that can happen a bunch of different ways. You have a client, for example, you could have a client who has just just met the large operating company exemption, right? They have 22 employees, they have over 5 million in revenue, and they have their physical presence in the US. And say in the next year, they had to lay off a third of their staff, and now their revenue is below the $5 million threshold on their reported tax return. Do you have a way to internally monitor that so that something would trigger in your system that they now have to file a BOI report? Or another example, the beneficial owners, the people, you have to include a government issued identification and the number and everything. Well, when that license, it's a license, when their license expires and you have to update that information, did you calendar that when you filed the report, that the expiration date on the license? So you have to sort of think those things through and see, is how can I do that? And how can I do that with mitigating risk to me? How can I try to eliminate human error on my side for failure to update? Can I automate some of this? Do I have the manpower for this? These are things that you have to think about. Or are you just going to say, I'm doing the report, and any additional report, you have to separately engage me? For example, some firms might say, I don't have the capacity to monitor. So my engagement letter will say, I will file the initial BOI report for the following entities, because say your client has a few. And if there is a correction that needs to be made or an update that needs to be made, you must, if you want me to do it, you must separately engage me to do that work. And if you cannot provide, if you don't notify me within 5 days, pick a number, that you notice that the update occurs, or that you notice that there's an error, if you have 5 days to notify me. And if it's after 5 days, we cannot guarantee that it will be, within that 30-day window, and you'll be responsible for penalties. Because again, you don't want the client to assume that you're going to follow up on this. So you have to think about exactly what you're going to offer, if you're going to offer services, and figure out, and this is all very tricky because, we don't have the report form, and we don't know what the database looks like. We don't know how to file it yet. So these are things you're going to need to think about when we have more information.
That's such great advice. And again, I go back to, I know it's frustrating, members, that we don't have clarity on some of these issues, that we haven't seen what it's going to look like, that we don't know what's happening with UPL. I can't even imagine what each of you must be going through as you're making these decisions on these. But I think if we take Nicole's guidance to heart, which is really the most important issue and risk, is to make sure that your clients are aware of this issue. If you do nothing else, make sure that you do that. Which leads me to, I think, a closing statement, perhaps a small ray of hope. We'll see. I don't know. Here we sit. We are just days away from the January 1st deadline, and there is a piece of legislation circulating Congress right now that would give us a 1-year delay. FICPA, along with our state society colleagues around the country, and of course the AICPA leading the charge on this federal issue, are in support of securing a delay for implementation, so that we would not have a January 1 of 24 delay, but it would be delayed for 1 year to allow for time to get clarity on some of these issues, specifically, for example, the UPL issue. So the good news is that this piece of legislation, it's House Bill 5119, has passed the House, and now it is over on the Senate side. Hopefully you have received our communication. I highly encourage you to write a letter. We have it all set up, and all you have to do is just hit send to our congressmen and senators, specifically Rubio and Scott. If you have a presence in other state, I certainly encourage you to write your senators in those states as well. Right now, The delayed implementation is sort of what we all have our fingers crossed for and have our efforts focused on, while at the same time trying to provide you with as much education as we possibly can on what is really a complex and murky issue. So this will likely not be the only time that Nicole and I will chat. We'll probably have a few more of these updates in the months ahead as we get more and more clarity on the issue. But Nicole, again, thank you so much for squeezing in some time to talk through this, talk about the risks that exist and some best practices, helpful hints that we can provide our CPA members across Florida, even with all of this uncertainty. So again, thank you so much for joining us today. Any closing comments or words of wisdom before we sign off?
I mean, just keep out there, raise awareness, call your senators. Like, we need more answers. So let's just try to make everyone, aware of all the questions that we still have so we can try to get some answers.
Absolutely. Well, and stay tuned to your emails team, the website, social media channels, et cetera. As we get information, as always, we will get it out to you as quickly as possible, even if that means, on a holiday or what have you in the days ahead. So be on the lookout. Nicole, again, thank you so much for joining us today. I know we'll be talking to you again in 2024. Members, reach out if you have any additional questions. And most importantly, happy holidays, be safe and be well, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks, Nicole. See you soon.
Thank you.